going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. This is the Science Dispatch podcast. I'm Cameron English. That is Dr. Chuck Dinerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, it's great to see you. Getting geared up for Christmas, for Hanukkah.
Yeah.
Really digging it. And you got double duty, you were telling me, right? So you got like multiple holidays.
Yeah, and we might as well throw in Kwanzaa, get them all. Hit the trifecta of holidays.
Holiday diversity is our strength, indeed. I was going to think of a clever transition, but we don't have one. We're just talking about the pleasant side effects of smoking too much marijuana, courtesy of our colleague, Dr. Josh Bloom. This story is called Scromiting, a very dark side of marijuana back in the news. Here's Josh's summary, and then Chuck fill in the details for us. So Josh writes, Scromiting is a grim slang term for the severe nausea and vomiting that can come with cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, a complication linked to long-term heavy cannabis use. As ER clinicians report, seeing more cases, the condition is forcing a fresh look at the gap between marijuana's, quote, harmless reputation and its real-world risks. Okay, so Chuck, we've talked some about this, but for the uninitiated, describe this lovely syndrome for us.
So this is seen in people that are heavy users of high-potency marijuana. So they're somewhere farther down the spectrum than Bob Marley, to use a boomer reference to make that distinction. And they present with basically intractable nausea and vomiting to the emergency department. And the only effective long-term treatment for that, besides the use of antiemetic compounds in the emergency room, is to not smoke weed. And so this is becoming an increasingly noticed problems over the last several years. And depending on how you'd like to go with this, we can go in any number of directions. I mean, the reality is that it ain't my generation's weed anymore. We've brought capitalism to the weed industry, and they did what capitalists do. They turned it from, a local kind of a skunk weed product where if you were really, really lucky, you could get some Maui Wowie or Acapulco Gold at $10 a lid. Not that I know anything about this, but this is what I read. And that was great. But now we've gone high tech with this, and we've applied hybrid breeding, and we've driven the amount of THC in the product up from 2 or 3% and up into the 20s and 30%. And so we're talking about a much more high potency product available now. The other great change in availability is it's gone from something that was delivered in little baggies in a furtive moment in the evening to something that you can go get in a child-proof container at the local store. That we've gone and we've legalized weed in a lot of states. So it's much more available, much more potent, and people therefore are using it more than in the past. So in some senses, it's like when you talk about a pharmaceutical product that's been tested on a population in controlled circumstances back in the 70s and 60s and 70s and found to have very few side effects, and then released into the wild, the general population. All of a sudden, as you give it to more and more people and they're using it in ways that are not necessarily the dosage suggestions that on the label, you start seeing complications.
Yeah, I can't imagine Biff at the marijuana shop is going to appropriately dose your gummy bears for you. That's just that's just my guess. Well, you made a couple of important points. The first is that, and I think this really undermines the case for legalization, is that as you legalize a substance, it actually becomes easier, because you're not afraid of going to jail or having your farm shut down, to breed these insane strains of, Dragonberry Magic Carpet Ride, where, you take one hit and you can see unicorns, right? But it's interesting, and your point about expanded use, because you do these controlled studies and it's a relatively small population you're dealing with, and you can see, oh, well, this guy ate a few more Cheetos, and, this guy was coughing a little bit, but you expand that to thousands or hundreds of thousands. I don't know how many people smoke or use marijuana regularly, but you get many more cases of side effects, including this. And I don't think this is typically fatal, but it's got to be unpleasant to sit in the ER and scream and vomit until
it's definitely unpleasant, to happen. And I think it's interesting when if you think about it in terms of a controlled study, there's a lot of people that we don't put into controlled studies. So that if it had been a controlled study drug 20, 30 years ago, people that had borderline mental issues would not be included. But now anybody can go out and pick up some gummies, and they're on their way. So a lot of the problems that we see now, as I said, really come from releasing it into the wild, into the general population. So
just so I'm clear, like you wouldn't recruit someone with schizophrenia and give them THC just to see what happens, right?
If you were doing a study to see if THC made them better, yes. But just to do a general study on the population, no, that would not be in there. Nor would we be giving it to pregnant women, as a generalization. Now, the other odd thing about this is, while we're talking about it, is that the president just signed a change in the scheduling of marijuana from a Schedule I drug to a Schedule III drug. And what a Schedule III drug is a drug that has some possible medicinal properties and has a low risk of addiction. And so, in some senses, that's correct. That it does have a low potential for addiction. At least it did when we were talking about lower concentrations, and it may, lots of air quotes here, have some medicinal purposes. Certainly, we see some value for the cannabinoids in treating epilepsy, for which there is an FDA-approved cannabinoid available. But across the wide spectrum of treating pain, not so much. Nausea and vomiting, some people say it does, some people don't. Basically, the results on a lot of these things have been mixed. But it's interesting to see that on one hand, the government is liberalizing the schedule of the drug, and on the other hand, we have health people saying this is a bad idea.
So the point being, going back to our discussion, I started to think about this differently talking to emergency medicine physicians. So with one doctor I was having a conversation with, he said, because he thinks about it differently, right? Because he's in the ER day in and day out, and he says, when you legalize this substance, people will talk about, how great it is to expand access, and we're not going to put people in jail, and all of the typical talking points. But he's saying, how much fuller is my ER going to be? Because there's people that are totally naive to this stuff who think because it's, they've lowered the scheduling, it's widely available. Well, it must be relatively safe if I can access it so easily, right? And that just changed my perspective. And it goes to your point about a larger population using it. So it seems to me that there's consequences coming along with this that we're really not prepared for. We're not exactly sure how big or how small they could be. But the heavy lifting is done, right? The advocates are saying, well, now we got it over the line, so, you guys can deal with all the consequences. And I find that a little
right. Well, it's as the evidence accrues, we're not willing to sit back and at least rethink for a moment what we're doing. I mean, I have no problem considering it a rescheduled drug. I do find it funny that the argument being made in Washington is it's so that we can do more research, when actually the people that have been advocating most strongly for it are people that are in the industry and want to get tax relief for working with a Schedule III drug rather than a Schedule I drug, which is completely banned. So there's once again that economic piece that is quietly talked about. And this is big business. We got to recognize that it's big business. As I said, I live out in Long Island, and it's a horticultural, agricultural area, meaning we don't grow row crops, we grow grapes and fun things like that. And the local flower nursery just sold out to a pot farm because it had the greenhouses and it had the infrastructure for trucks to pick up and deliver things. And they sold out for $45 million. So this is not this is not mom and pop stuff anymore. This is a real business.
Yeah, there's big money behind it. One of the striking things about Josh's story is this quote from an emergency medicine physician who he's interviewed and who's written for the website. Her name is Ronit Lev. And I was sort of surprised to hear this from her. I mean, she's, from my understanding, having talked to her and listened to a couple of episodes of her podcast, she's pretty skeptical of most drugs, including opioids. But she says it is medically safer to take regulated and prescribed opioids, such as hydrocodone and oxycodone, under a doctor's supervision than unregulated high-dose THC products with various contaminants and adulterants. And that's striking because the story everybody hears, of course, as we've talked about ad nauseum, is that, you know, if you take an OxyContin pill, you're going to become an addict, and you know you'll be sitting in the alley, craving another hit. So I don't know. As a physician, maybe talk about that. Why would it be safer to take a drug that does have a high abuse liability, like a medical opioid? Those can be abused very easily, but why would that be safer?
Well, I agree with Dr. Lev's generalization. I'm not sure it's completely and concisely true. I think what she's really saying is that using a approved drug under supervision is much better than dealing with a drug, natural as it may be, at dosages where we do not really understand the impact and where we're not having some individuals say this is probably not the drug for you to use. You know, in some ways, it's no different than any of the other recreational drugs that we have, like tobacco and of course, alcohol, the ultimate in recreational drugs. There's no clear identification of the appropriate dosage range.
Right.
For the cannabinoids. And, back to the dosage makes the poison. And what you're seeing with these people with the vomiting is that they found their level of poisoning.
They missed the therapeutic window, as you're fond of saying.
They blew right through the therapeutic window.
I would suspect that the industry, the marijuana industry, whatever you want to call it, generally, they don't want a regulated product the way that opioids are regulated, because that would mean extensive clinical trials. It would mean post-marketing surveillance data, which would be absurdly expensive, and it would effectively crush the industry. It would be, a handful of pharma companies who could survive that sort of a decathlon, let's call it. And so I guess that sort of speaks to the truth of what she's saying, is like, yes, it's technically legal and it's regulated to some extent, mostly at the state level, but it's never going to be as safe or as low risk as a medically prescribed opioid under a doctor's care. That seems to be legitimate. What do you think?
Oh, I think that's true. And the other piece that goes into this, of course, is this is a natural product. This is not being built in the lab. I mean, that makes a difference, I think, in people's minds. But since it's a natural
product, doesn't make it any better, right? You're just saying people's perception is it's a plant,
people's
and
perception
therefore
that this is a plant. Come on, we're plant-based eaters now, so we can be plant-based smokers. Well,
the poppy is a plant too, though, right?
Okay, well, that poppies, tobacco, all of those are all plant-based. But what I was ultimately trying to get to point is that these plants grow in the ground and they absorb whatever nutrients and heavy metals and everything else that is in the ground with it. They absorb their share of arsenic. They absorb their share of lead. And so if we were to put these natural products to testing and send them over to the people that like to do those kind of studies, I guess we would find a lot of trace elements that were very bad for people. So that's another reason why we don't want to get too deeply involved in doing the chemical analysis.
Would there be enough to cause concern, though? Because you could say the same thing about rice or grain. Like
I don't think that it would, but it would take that veneer of it's a plant, so it's good for you.
Yeah.
and make you at least think twice about it. And of course, this would lead, of course, to the hydroponically grown, natural, no pesticides, no fertilizer used, THC products. That would be, the logical move by the market would be to get around that by breeding them in a whole different way.
Yeah. All right. Well, fun times ahead, it sounds like. I was going to ask you about one other thing. Oh, yeah. So as we wrap up here, people will often, as you just did, right, they'll make the comparison to alcohol or tobacco. But I wonder if those are as helpful as the weed advocates think they are, because what they're saying, in effect, is we already have widespread alcohol use, which, of course, is widely abused. It's been implicated as a cause of many cancers and all sorts of medical conditions. It exacerbates mental illness if people use it. And therefore, we should have more very, very potent substances for these same people to enjoy, right? And of course, and Dr. Lev has made this point too, is that if you give people access to pot and then you also prescribe them opioids for a major surgery or something, they're not going to go, well, the responsible thing to do is to take one of these pills per day until they're gone. They're going to take multiple of the pills, and then they're going to smoke weed as well. And so you're getting that poly-drug effect, which can be very dangerous.
Well, I got that. But, I would go back to the metaphor about alcohol. I mean, and I think that my generation, the weed of my generation was pretty much like a cordial or a nice glass of sherry. and today's weed is a bottle of Everclear. And the potency is just very, very different. And so you have to we get back to the dose is the poison, or as somebody else said, that moderation is the first thing, and moderation is the first thing to go, that we don't moderate.
Well, and with these strains that are circulating today, they're so easy to abuse. I mean, I've only used marijuana a few times in my life, but one of the last times was in 2018 or so. And I had a little one of those vape pens that one of my buddies got me because it's legal out where I am. I mean, like 1 or 2 pulls on that thing, and I was like, for 24 plus hours, just loopy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So in other words, even if you go into it thinking, I'm going to be responsible with this, pretty soon you end up passed out on your couch having eaten an entire bag of salami, right? It's very difficult.
That's a scary thought. A very scary thought.
Right. But, so in other words, if you have a glass of sherry or you have a cocktail, it's much easier to moderate.
Yes.
Than it is
because we already know the dose. The problem is that we, as I said, what we're pouring now into that little glass is Everclear, and it's 10 or 15 times more potent than that glass of sherry used to be. And we are beginning to see the consequences of high-dose marijuana.
Yeah. All right. Well, go check out this article and let us know what you think. It's called Scromiting. I almost called it Cromiting.
Yeah. Well, that would be when you have a crumb cake with it.
That's right. That's when you vomit up the crumb cake.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a lovely picture for you, everyone, as you go into the holidays. Okay. Once again, Scromiting, A Very Dark Side of Marijuana, back in the news. That's by Dr. Josh Bloom. That's at acsh.org. When you go to the site, click the subscribe tab, punch in your email address. We'll send you the articles we publish. The ones that you read are usually the ones we talk about. We are on X at acsh.org. We are on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. ACSH Matter of Facts is are all of our handles over there, hosted by our colleague Anna Dulosky. Go check that stuff out. Subscribe if you're on those platforms. And thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time.